in the end, people say, well, yeah, what's your message? What is the overall point? And the absolute start of it is that Britain is safer, stronger, and more secure inside the European Union than we would be as a country if we decided to leave. And I'll concentrate on the positive messages, because again, the other point people make is that, well, you know, it's just Project Fear. You're just emphasising the risks of staying out. And that has to be part of it. I don't resile from that at all, because the Out campaign has no idea what Britain would look like outside the EU. They don't agree among themselves. Well, they don't agree among themselves about anything. They don't like each other very much, as we're reading in today's papers. But perhaps even more importantly than that, they have no concept of whether are we going to have a Norwegian-type deal or a Swiss-type deal or a bespoke British-type deal, or how good that deal would be in economic terms, in trade terms, or in any other terms. And pointing out the risk of that is an entirely legitimate thing for the In campaign to do, and we shall. But I'd quite take the point that that's not enough, that there needs to be positive reasons based on facts and evidence of why Britain does better inside Europe. And my overall point, which is I think particularly germane for conservative audiences, is that many of us will have spent much of the early months of last year going around pointing out how good Britain's economy was, how we've managed to keep inflation low, to halve the deficit, employment is at the highest level ever, we created 2 million apprenticeships, all those things that we were saying in the general election campaign, which people believe, which convince people because they're true. All of that has happened with Britain as a member of the European Union. So it appears to me slightly perverse for my Conservative colleagues to go around saying it's absolutely appalling, this bureaucratic monstrosity is destroying British industry, months after they were touring the country telling us how marvellously the British economy was doing. So as an overall point, this seems to me to be quite powerful because, again, it's palpably true. But we obviously need to get a bit below the surface. We know that there are 3 million jobs linked to our trade with the EU. No, I'm not saying that 3 million extra people will be unemployed the day after we left, but over time it would clearly have some effect. There are many sectors which are particularly dependent on inward investment, and inward investment that wants to be inside a European single market, not just a British market. Obviously, the motor trade is the biggest one of those. It employs over 700,000 people, and every one of those plants are selling for the whole of Europe and not just for the UK. We have £2.4 billion a year inward investment from other European countries. And if you like, at a more personal level, families in their individual budgets benefit from our EU membership. We all have cheap air travel now, only brought about because of European regulation, because of the things that people rail against. Much of that regulation actually promotes competition, and in that formerly horribly oligopolistic sector, never use that word in public, it's difficult to say, which used to keep all our prices artificially high, and 15 years ago one used to complain that you could fly across America for less than it cost to fly about 100 miles in Europe. All of that's gone now, thanks to the European Union. The next phase that really irritates people are phone charges, roaming charges, and so on a personal level. They will all have gone by 2017. They're much cheaper now. I think we're saving 73p in the pound from each call, thanks to the tightening of Europe-wide regulation. And the next phase will be the digital single market, which is part of the programme of the current Commission, the Juncker Commission. And Britain, which is good at digital industries, will benefit hugely, both in terms of job creation, if we can sell those skills and those products and those services into every European country without any kind of barriers. But also, individuals will benefit. You know, if you're watching Sky Sport and you're lying on holiday and you can lie on the beach and watch it on your iPad, then that will be a significant step forward, at least for those who want to watch the football when they're on holiday, if not for the rest of their family. But all those kinds of basic consumer products are going to be, which are now often delivered digitally, will be much easier to get when we have a digital single market. So there is good, solid basis of economic argument for staying in. But there are wider arguments. As I say, it's not just we're better off, but we're also more secure. And this, I think, in what is sadly an increasingly dangerous world, where not just terrorism, but serious crime is overwhelmingly international, is a reason which people are convinced, actually, when you put it to them, as a reason for staying in, but will become increasingly important as well. Things like the European arrest warrant, which have enabled us to both export criminals who have committed crimes in this country back to their countries to be tried, but have also enabled us to bring back to this country to try and convict people who've committed crimes here and then fled to the rest of Europe. Those are really important. But looking ahead, almost more important is tying Britain's law and order services, both our police but also our security services, into the wider European network that exists for the immediate exchange of information and intelligence. One of the things we saw after the terrible attacks in Paris was that there'd not been good enough exchange of information. People were being allowed to cross borders and travel across Europe without being caught, without being checked. And all of that it is possible to stop, and all of that is stopped in some ways. And in the last few months, Theresa May has introduced measures in the House of Commons that will allow us to plug into those computer systems, and they make a huge difference to the effectiveness of our own police and other police forces in actually keeping tabs on not just terrorists who will no doubt desire to create as much mayhem on the streets of London as they did in Paris, but also serious criminals, people traffickers, drug traffickers, gun traffickers, and so on. And the cooperation at a European level on security is going to be ever more vital to keeping Britain safe, keeping our streets safe, keeping our citizens safe in the future. But the third point I make is stronger, and it's really about Britain's voice in the world. And inevitably, this has to be a little more nebulous. I can't quote facts and figures about this, but all common sense tells us that if we withdraw from the EU, yes, we'll still be one of the world's biggest economies. Yes, we'll still have all the military power and the soft power that we already have. But our voice in the world will be diminished. We know that all friendly powers in the world want us to stay in Europe. They want the British voice to be strong in Europe because they think by and large we are a force for good inside the European Union. But they also want to know that Britain is not standing alone. And any American president, let alone any Chinese leader, any Indian leader, would just think it a peculiar eccentricity of the British at this particular time to say, we don't want to have any part of a body that consists of 28 friendly democracies. It is hugely important that we retain in as many countries as the world a commitment to democracy, to liberal values, to all the things that unite Democrats in Britain and unite Democrats across Europe. Now is not the time, particularly in the face of terrorism and terrible violence lapping at Europe's borders, for Britain to say, we want to get out of here. Because you just know that the American president, who the first phone call he or she wants to make, probably won't be to a British Prime Minister if Britain has pulled out of Europe. If there's 500 or so million people in one organisation, that's where they'll go to next for their friends. If we're trying to negotiate a trade deal with the Chinese or the Indians or anyone else, it's better to be part of a wider grouping. There is genuinely safety and prosperity in numbers as well. And as a Conservative, I am proud of Britain's role in the world, not just our history, but our current role in the world. I want the values which we all espouse actually to play a bigger role in the world. And it seems to me unarguable that as part of a larger organisation, that voice, that British voice for democracy and liberal values, will be louder in the world. So those are some of the arguments that I think we need to be deploying in the coming months. Let me talk just very briefly about the organisation, particularly the cross-party organisation, Britain Stronger in Europe, which I'm a board member of, and which, as I say, is not just a cross-party organisation, and it's an interesting aspect of life which I've not had before, sitting on a board with Peter Mandelson and Caroline Lucas, and people who, on the whole, I haven't found myself agreeing much with in previous political struggles, but we all, put it this way, we're all working together a lot better than people who all belong to the Conservative Party, who appear not to be able to stand each other on the outside, but that's their problem, not ours. But more to the point about that board is that it's quite deliberately dominated by non-politicians. It's chaired, as you know, by Stuart Rose, who used to run Marks and Spencer, but it's also got on it a Vice-Chancellor, the President of the National Union of Students. It's got Trevor Phillips, the former chair of the Equalities Commission. It's got June Sarpong on it. It's got Jude Kelly on it from the South Bank. So we are quite deliberately making the point that the benefits of being inside the European Union are not just, if you like, the mainstream political benefits. It's not just the economy and Home Office security matters, the sort of things I've been talking about, or diplomacy and foreign affairs. It is actually better for the environment, it's better for science, it's better for the arts, it's particularly better for the universities and our research base. And one of the things we'll be doing, and there may well be people in this room who can help in this, is establishing individual communities of interest, saying in our particular sector, there are benefits to being in. So we've already got the universities campaigning. You will have seen that Joe Johnson was giving his blessing to the Scientists for Europe, which has been set up. We're very hopeful that the big environmental groups will come together as well, because in each of these areas, which are often areas where people who are not particularly engaged in politics care about very, very passionately, there is a very, very good tale to tell of how Britain benefits and British people benefit from the European Union. So that will be happening on a cross-party front. And as it were, coming back inside the Conservative Party, in a way it's more difficult for us than any other party. Every other party, or UKIP obviously, every other party is officially committed to staying in. So the Labour Party can deploy all their resources, the Greens obviously, the SNP won't talk to anyone else, but they are going to run their own in-campaign in Scotland, and even the Liberal Democrats. I mean, talking about Liberal Democrat resources may feel like it should get a laugh at this stage. But actually we all know, those of us who spent our lives fighting them, that in certain areas they are very, very effective at doorstep campaigning. They will be devoting all their resources to that. The only party that, as a party, is staying neutral is the Conservative Party, and therefore Conservatives who want to stay in will have to do it themselves. I am struck with a number of colleagues coming here and saying, well, when are we going to get stuff? When are we going to be told what to do? Is that people who have spent their lives complaining about CCHQ don't half miss it when it's not there, and they haven't got something to rail against because they're sending out the wrong type of leaflets or something like that. It is all down to us. We have to set up our own grassroots organisation. We have to campaign for ourselves. The cross-party grouping already has now in place field operators in every region who will in turn be setting up local groups, but there will also be obviously local conservative groups who specifically to aim at conservative activists and supporters, and it will be patchy. You know, a lot of it will depend on individual members of Parliament, but not even that. Every individual member of Parliament who may take a strong view one way or the other will have activists in their own association who take the different view. So it is all there to be done, but it is a matter of self-help, because we are now at the stage where it is conceivable that the referendum will be on June the 23rd, in which case it's only 5 months away, and there's not much time to go. So there will be, as I say, a ramping up of activity. I hope and expect that the Prime Minister will get a good deal. I think the reforms that he gets will be an important part of the eventual campaign, but not the whole of the eventual campaign, because I think people will recognise that this isn't just like an election decision. This is a once in 50 years decision. And so they will very much look at the big picture about Britain's place in the world, about what matters most for their family, thinking very long term. And in that regard, again, there are arguments to be had. To give you some insight into the polling evidence we have, broadly speaking, the younger you are, the more likely you are to vote yes. And this has disadvantages because we know the older you are, the more likely you are to vote at all. That is what all experience tells us. So we have got to inspire younger people. I mean, I don't just mean first-time voters, but people up to the age of about 45. And in all those age groups, there's quite a significant plurality for a yes vote. We have got to inspire them to turn out. And I know Laura, I suspect, will talk about this because she's been doing a lot of great work on this. But on top of that, I think it is a case because people accept it's a once in 50 year discussion and argument that the country is having with itself, that actually, effectively, getting 18, 19, 20-year-olds to talk to their grandparents and say, it's my future you're voting on, and this is why I think we should stay in. That is, I think, it will be a very, very powerful argument, not just at the grassroots, but actually within families, within houses, as the referendum comes closer. So there's a huge amount of work to do. The polls suggest it's very, very close, but I remain confident that in the end, the British people will show the common sense that they characteristically show when they're faced with a big decision and will vote to keep Britain in Europe. Thank you very much.